welcome to the show. You know, this is the space where we take a massive stack of research articles, those scattered notes you've been meaning to read for months, and we just extract the exact insights you need.
Right, the stuff you actually need to navigate life.
Exactly. Our mission is to cut through all the noise and hand you the most vital, surprising, and actionable knowledge out there. And today, our focus is really on decoding the hidden hardware of your brain.
Which is so crucial because, honestly, the traditional rules of productivity, they are completely failing most of us.
Oh, absolutely feeling us.
Yeah.
We're going to map out your unique neurological wiring so you can actually protect your finite energy. But to start off, I really want to paint a picture for you. Just, imagine you're sitting at your desk.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It's a Tuesday afternoon,
Yeah.
right around, say, 2:30 p.m. The overhead fluorescent lights are emitting this faint, almost imperceptible, high-pitched hum.
Ugh, the worst.
Right. It's the kind of sound you don't fully register until it suddenly feels like a literal mosquito is trapped inside your skull. And you're wearing a wool sweater that, for the first 4 hours of the day, was perfectly fine.
But not anymore.
Definitely not anymore. Suddenly, the collar feels incredibly scratchy against your neck. It's abrasive. Like every single time you shift your weight, it prickles your skin. You look at your computer monitor, and there's just this blank document staring right back at you.
Taunting you, basically.
Exactly. And next to the monitor is this mounting stack of tasks, sticky notes, unread emails, and you just feel this overwhelming, heavy sense of absolute paralysis. I mean, you literally cannot make your hands type a single word.
Yeah, you're just frozen.
Frozen. And then you glance across the room, and there's your colleague. They are happily tapping away at their keyboard, sipping an iced coffee, wearing a crisp button-down shirt, and they seem completely, utterly immune to the sensory chaos of this office.
That is such a striking image, and I think almost everyone listening right now can instantly relate to it.
Oh, 100%.
Because when you look at that colleague, your immediate reaction is rarely one of just, simple observation. It's almost always internalized as a deeply personal failing.
That is exactly the trap. Let's unpack that inner monologue for a second, because it is brutal. You sit there, scratching your neck, staring at the blinking cursor, and the questions just start firing.
What's wrong with me?
Right. Why am I so exhausted right now? Why does this exact same physical setup work perfectly for them, but it feels like an invisible trap to me? Is there something fundamentally broken about my work ethic? Am I just lazy?
Which is such a heavy word.
It is. You start spiraling into this profound guilt, assuming that your inability to function in that specific moment is a massive character flaw.
And that guilt is the heaviest burden of all. It actually compounds the paralysis. But what we're looking at in our source material today completely shatters that assumption.
It really does.
If there's one core rule for our exploration today, like one central mantra I really want you to hold on to as we map out the human mind, it's this: 0% guilt, 100% responsibility.
0% guilt, 100% responsibility.
Yeah.
I like the rhythm of that.
Yeah.
But let's ground it. What does that actually mean in the context of my scratchy sweater, the humming lights, and my blank screen?
Well, it means that you are absolutely not to blame for how your brain is wired. The biological hardware of your personality, the way your nervous system reacts to that fluorescent light, the way your specific sensory receptors process the texture of that wool, a massive portion of that was already set in stone by the time you were 5 years old.
Wait, hold on. 5 years old.
Yeah, age 5.
That seems incredibly early to lock in something as complex as a personality. What is actually happening in the brain at that age to make these traits so rigid?
It comes down to a biological process called synaptogenesis, and right after that, synaptic pruning.
Yeah.
So in your first few years of life, your brain is just exploding with new neural connections.
Saps.
Exactly, synapses. And it's doing this at a rate you will literally never experience again. It's highly plastic, highly adaptable. But right around age 4 or 5, the brain kind of shifts strategies. It realizes it can't maintain all these billions of pathways efficiently, so it starts pruning away the ones you don't use often, and it heavily reinforces or myelinates the ones you do use.
Okay, so it's like paving a dirt road into a highway.
That's a great way to put it. This process creates physical, biological superhighways for your perceptions, your emotional reactions, and your motivations. By age 5, the foundational architecture of your nervous system's alarm bells and reward centers is largely poured in concrete.
Right.
So you can't feel guilty for those baseline biological reactions any more than you can feel guilty for, your height or your eye color.
That reframes things significantly.
Yeah.
I mean, if my brain built a superhighway that interprets a scratchy sweater as a literal threat to my survival, I can't just like willpower my way out of feeling that friction.
You're hitting on the core issue perfectly. However, while you hold 0% guilt for that neurological baseline, you hold 100% responsibility for how you manage it.
Ah, right, the second half of the mantra.
Exactly. You are responsible for recognizing those biological patterns and actively building the habits, boundaries, and environments that allow you to navigate the world effectively. You might not have chosen your brain's operating system, but you are the system administrator.
The system admin of my own brain. I love that. So we have a clear mission today. We are going to decode the specific biological traits of this operating system so you can stop swimming against your own current.
Because it's exhausting.
It is. And because we carry around an enormous amount of unnecessary shame about our inability to focus or handle stress. But before we fix our habits, we have to look under the hood.
Right into the wiring.
Right. Our sources today detail a highly specific 10-dimension personality framework. But before we get to the 10 dimensions, I really want to clarify something. We throw the word personality around a lot.
We do.
We talk about it like it's a general vibe or, a fun little online quiz you take to find out which type of bread you are.
Right, which completely trivializes the actual science behind it. In the clinical and neurological literature we're examining, personality is not a parlor trick.
No, not at all.
It refers to very stable perceptions, emotions, and motivations that you systematically experience in reaction to outside stimuli. When a stimulus hits your five senses, your brain processes it. The specific neurons that fire, the neurotransmitters that flood your system, and the pathways those signals take, they are highly individualized.
And that specific, predictable pathway is your personality.
Exactly. It's practically as fixed as a fingerprint.
But how do we get to a 10-dimension model? Because, humans have been trying to categorize each other forever. The ancient Greeks had the four humors, right?
Right. Choleric, melancholic, phlegmatic, and sanguine.
Yeah, which basically blamed your mood on bodily fluids like bile and phlegm. Not super scientific.
Not quite. But we've been trying to predict each other's behavior since the dawn of humanity because it's an evolutionary survival imperative. Think about it. If you were dealing with a member of your tribe thousands of years ago, you needed to know, if I accidentally bump into this person, are they going to brush it off or are they going to hit me with a rock?
That's a very practical question.
Very. We evolved to recognize behavioral patterns to stay alive. And over the centuries, this evolved from those ancient humors through various less-than-scientific theories until the mid-20th century.
What happened then?
That's when researchers utilized the lexical hypothesis. They essentially analyzed human language, assuming that any trait vital to human interaction would eventually get a word assigned to it. Through massive data analysis, they found 5 core clusters of adjectives, which became the famous 5-factor model, often called the Big Five.
Right. Most of our listeners are probably familiar with the Big Five: extraversion, neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. But our source material takes this further, breaking those 5 down into 10.
Yes, and this is where modern computing power and neurobiology really changed the game in the early 2000s.
How so?
Statistical analysis allowed researchers to discover that each of those 5 major traits actually breaks down into 2 distinct subdimensions. And crucially, those subdimensions are often driven by entirely different biological and neurological mechanisms.
Okay, that is fascinating.
That gives us the 10-dimension model we're unpacking today. And a vital disclaimer before we reveal these. There is no such thing as a good or bad profile. Every single trait has distinct evolutionary advantages and severe disadvantages, depending entirely on the context.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. We're so obsessed with optimizing ourselves into some, ideal human. But this framework argues that a universally ideal brain literally does not exist.
It's a complete myth.
Okay, let's explore these dimensions. Let's start with extroversion. Colloquially, we just think of an extrovert as the loud person at a party. But biologically, it's much more complex than that, right?
Far more complex. Extraversion is fundamentally about your sensitivity to reward versus your sensitivity to risk. In the 10-dimension model, it breaks down into enthusiasm and dominance.
Enthusiasm and dominance.
Yeah.
Let's look at enthusiasm first.
Sure. This trait is deeply tied to the brain's mesolimbic dopamine pathway, the reward system. People with high enthusiasm have a highly reactive dopamine system. Their brain very easily anticipates positive outcomes.
So if you pitch them a new project,
Their brain instantly floods with dopamine and says, wow, yes, That is a brilliant idea. Let's do it right now. They express positive emotion quickly because their internal reward expectation is just constantly lighting up.
Now, here's where the neurology gets incredibly fascinating to me. The source material draws a very sharp distinction between the dopamine system and the endogenous opioid system. It frames it as the difference between wanting and liking. Can you break that down? Because I think we constantly confuse the two.
We confuse them constantly, and honestly, to our own detriment. Dopamine is the wanting molecule. It provides the drive, the anticipation, the motivation to go out and secure the reward.
Okay, so that's the hustle.
Exactly. That's what fuels high enthusiasm and high dominance, the urge to assert influence to reach a goal. But the actual enjoyment of the moment, the peaceful satisfaction, the genuine liking of the reward, that is governed by the brain's opioid system, which is driven by endorphins.
Wait, so you can want something without actually liking it once you get it?
Yes,
Yeah.
you can have an incredibly active dopamine system driving you to constantly seek out new goals, new jobs, new relationships. But if you don't have the capacity to pause and engage the opioid system, you never actually enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
We all know people who are relentlessly driven. They chase the promotion for 5 years, working 80-hour weeks. They are highly enthusiastic, highly dominant.
And then what happens?
The second they get the title, they seem completely hollow. And by Tuesday, they're obsessing over the next promotion. They've mastered the biology of wanting, but they are biologically blind to liking.
Precisely. And conversely, consider someone with lower extraversion. They might not have that massive dopamine drive constantly pushing them to conquer the boardroom,
Right.
but they might be exceptionally skilled at quietly sitting on a porch with a cup of tea, engaging their opioid system, and deeply, genuinely liking and savoring that peaceful moment. Neither is wrong. They are just running on different biological engines.
So we've seen how dopamine drives us to seek out rewards. But what happens when the environment isn't offering a reward, but a threat? How does the brain's alarm system differ from its reward system?
That brings us to the second major trait, neuroticism. Now, it's historically a terrible, stigmatizing word, but
Nobody wants to be called
Right.
neurotic.
right. But in this clinical model, it simply means your sensitivity to negative emotion. It breaks down into two dimensions, volatility and withdrawal. This entire trait is fundamentally tied to the amygdala, which acts as the brain's primitive alarm system, and the HPA axis, which controls your stress response.
Let me throw out a hypothetical to see if I'm grasping the mechanism here.
Mm.
Let's say two people are sitting at a cafe. They both look at their phones and receive the exact same stressful text message from their boss.
Okay.
The text says, "We need to talk about your project performance immediately."
A universally terrifying text message.
Right, so the person with a low volatility and low withdrawal profile reads it, shrugs, and thinks, okay, well, I'll deal with that when I get to the office, and just goes back to eating their croissant. Their physical baseline barely moves.
Very calm.
But the person with high volatility, the moment they read those words, their amygdala bypasses the logical prefrontal cortex entirely. Sounds a 5-alarm fire, is not just a mental worry, it is a violent physical cascade.
Sure.
The HPA axis dumps cortisol and adrenaline into their bloodstream. Their chest tightens, their breathing becomes shallow, their pupils dilate. The text message literally triggers the exact same physiological survival response as if a tiger just walked into the cafe.
That is exactly the mechanism, and that survival response typically manifests in one of the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or flock.
Walk us through those.
Well, a highly volatile person might lean toward fight. The adrenaline manifests as an immediate flash of anger, and they aggressively text the boss back, defending their work before they've even thought it through.
I've seen that happen.
Someone high in withdrawal might lean toward flight. They silence their phone, shove it to the bottom of their bag, and just try to escape the feeling entirely.
But they just ignore it.
Right. Or freeze, they just stare blankly at the screen, completely paralyzed, unable to type a response. Or flock, they immediately screenshot the text and send it to a group chat with their 3 best friends, seeking social support and external validation to calm their nervous system.
It's wild to realize that this reaction is largely involuntary. It's a biological alarm system you didn't install, but you're forced to live in the house it protects.
That is a wonderful analogy, and it really highlights why the 0% guilt rule is so crucial. You cannot hate yourself for the alarm ringing.
Right.
Now, moving to the third trait, conscientiousness. This breaks down into industry and order. Industry is your baseline drive for hard work, focus, and executing plans. Order is your psychological need for structure and predictability.
And what's the biology there?
This trait is heavily reliant on the prefrontal cortex, which handles executive function. High-order individuals desperately need boxes to feel safe. They need rules, clear itineraries, color-coded spreadsheets, and predictable daily routines. When their environment is categorized into proper boxes, their prefrontal cortex relaxes.
But if you have low order, those exact same boxes feel like a prison. Like a highly structured, meticulously planned corporate environment feels like a safe harbor to a high-order person, but to a low-order person, it feels suffocating, restrictive, and deeply uncomfortable. They need space to operate organically and pivot when inspiration strikes.
Exactly, which transitions perfectly to our fourth trait, agreeableness. This is one that often gets misunderstood as simply being nice. But biologically, it's about how you process interpersonal relationships. It breaks down into compassion and politeness.
I am so glad we're covering this one because the distinction between compassion and politeness seems crucial. They sound similar, but I imagine they play out very differently in real life.
They absolutely do. Compassion is linked to the brain's mirror neuron system and theory of mind. People high in compassion literally feel the emotional pain of others. If they see someone crying, their mirror neurons fire in a way that simulates that sadness in their own body. They are deeply empathetic and emotionally invested in alleviating suffering.
And politeness.
Politeness, on the other hand, is about respect for authority, social norms, and avoiding interpersonal conflict. A highly polite person might not feel your emotional pain deeply, but they will follow all the social rules to ensure they do not offend you.
So you could have someone who is extremely high in compassion, but very low in politeness. That would be the person who deeply cares about your well-being, but will break every social rule and yell at a manager to get you the help you need.
Yes, the fiercely protective advocate. And conversely, low agreeableness overall means a person is more detached, logical, and less swayed by emotional appeals. In a crisis, you actually want someone with lower agreeableness making the decisions because they aren't paralyzed by the emotional weight of the situation. They can look at the cold, hard facts and execute a pragmatic strategy. Again, there is no good or bad trait-only context.
That brings us to the fifth and final major trait, openness, which breaks down into experience and intellect. And this circles right back to our opening scenario with the scratchy sweater.
It does. Openness to experience is fundamentally about how your brain's sensory gating system filters the world through your five senses. People highly open to experience have a very porous sensory filter.
Porous, meaning a lot gets through.
Exactly. They crave aesthetic beauty. They deeply notice the textures, the colors, the lighting, the ambient sounds in a room. They need their environment to feel inspiring and harmonious because their brain is processing all of that data constantly.
And low openness.
People with low openness to experience have a much tighter sensory filter. They are highly pragmatic. They don't care if the office is painted a hideous shade of beige. As long as the internet is fast and the chair functions, they prefer practical, functional solutions over creatively beautiful ones.
So the person agonizing over the scratchy wool sweater and the humming fluorescent light has high openness to sensory experience. Their porous filter is letting in all that sensory input intensely, overwhelming their system. Meanwhile, the colleague with the iced coffee might have low openness to experience, so their brain is pragmatically filtering out the hum and the fabric. They're just looking at the function. I am at work to type, I am typing, everything is fine.
That is exactly the biological mechanism at play. The colleague isn't stronger or better at working. Their brain is simply gating the sensory information differently.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
I am looking at this entire 10-dimension framework. If my brain is just this fixed circuit board of dopamine responses, amygdala alarms, mirror neurons, and sensory filters all poured into concrete by the time I am 5 years old, doesn't that make me a robot?
That's the big fear, right?
Yeah. Where is my free will? Are we just complex meat machines running pre-installed software?
That is the ultimate philosophical and scientific question. And the answer requires us to separate the core personality from the learned behavior. Your core personality is the initial biological impulse.
The first reaction.
Exactly. It's the immediate rush of cortisol when you get the text message. It's the sudden flash of anger. It's the overwhelming urge to run away. You do not control that impulse. It happens in milliseconds. But the learned behavior is the action you take in the seconds and minutes after the impulse.
Oh, I see.
You might have a high volatility impulse that makes you feel sudden, intense rage at a piece of criticism, but you can use your free will, your prefrontal cortex, to learn a behavior. You take a deep breath, you step away from the keyboard, and you wait 20 minutes for your parasympathetic nervous system to calm you down before you respond.
So I am not responsible for the alarm bell ringing, but I am entirely responsible for whether I grab a fire extinguisher or throw gasoline on the fire.
Exactly. You are the manager of a very complex, sometimes stubborn factory. But here is the critical caveat, and I'm glad you brought up the friction of this process. Suppressing your core personality to execute a learned behavior takes a massive amount of metabolic energy.
It's exhausting.
Highly exhausting. If your baseline impulse is to yell and you constantly force yourself to speak calmly, you are burning through your cognitive reserves. We call this masking. And if you spend your entire day masking your true neurological traits to fit into an environment that doesn't suit you, you will eventually collapse.
Which explains the 2:30 p.m. paralysis at the desk. It is not just the scratchy sweater. It is the fact that I have spent 6 hours using all my energy to pretend the sweater isn't bothering me.
You're hitting on the core mechanism there. And this brings us to a massive paradigm shift in our source material. Now that we understand our brains have these distinct fixed alarms and sensory filters, we can see why a standard office cubicle or a traditional classroom is biologically hostile to certain people.
Because it's a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. We need to shift our cultural conversation away from just seeking well-being and move toward well-doing.
Well-doing. Let's unpack that concept. Because normally when we talk about well-being in corporate or modern culture, it's entirely about what happens after hours.
Yeah.
It's the hot yoga class at 6 p.m. It's the overpriced bubble bath on Sunday night. It's the mindfulness app you use while sitting in gridlock traffic. Well-being is usually treated as the antidote to the poison of the workday.
Right. We treat well-being as the bandage we apply to the wounds inflicted by our daily tasks. We endure misery from 9 to 5 and then try to frantically heal ourselves from 5 to 9.
That's a terrible cycle.
It is. But well-doing exists at the intersection of your well-being and your actual work. It is about infusing health and comfort directly into how we work, think, and learn. It's proactively designing the process so that it doesn't wound you in the first place. And the foundation of well-doing is a concept called cognitive comfort.
Cognitive comfort. How does that differ from traditional physical comfort, like making sure I have an ergonomic chair so my lower back doesn't ache?
Physical comfort is a small part of it, but cognitive comfort goes much deeper into neuroscience. It is about adjusting your sensory environment so that your brain can fluidly process information without unnecessary friction.
Back to the sensory filters.
Yes. We talked about openness to experience and sensory filters. If your environment is constantly triggering low-level alarms in your nervous system, like the hum of a light or an itchy tag, your brain experiences what we call allostatic load. It's spending precious processing power trying to ignore those alarms, leaving you with very little cognitive bandwidth for actual problem-solving or creativity.
That brings it back to the small, tangible sensory details of everyday life. For me, cognitive comfort is heavily dependent on the tactile feedback of writing.
Oh, really? Tell me about that.
I literally cannot focus if I am forced to use a cheap, scratchy ballpoint pen on thin, flimsy paper. It physically irritates my brain. The friction pulls my attention away from my thoughts and down to my hand. But if I use a heavy, perfectly balanced pen that is a smooth, ink-heavy glide across thick, high-quality paper,
The whole experience changes.
suddenly the physical friction is gone, the allostatic load drops to zero, and the ideas just flow.
That is a perfect textbook example of creating cognitive comfort. You remove the sensory friction so the cognitive process could thrive. For others, it might involve proprioceptive input, the comforting, grounding pressure of a heavy, weighted blanket draped over their lap while they answer complex emails.
Wait, how does that work biologically?
The deep pressure stimulation actually signals the parasympathetic nervous system to calm down. It lowers the heart rate.
What about auditory environments? Because people seem incredibly divided on this. Some people need the absolute pin-drop silence of a library to read a single paragraph.
And for someone else, that absolute silence is deafening. In a silent room, their brain becomes hyper-vigilant, listening for any tiny sound which distracts them. They might require the specific low-level hum of coffee shop background noise clinking mugs, the espresso machine, indistinct chatter.
There's actually a term for that, isn't there?
Yes, there's a neurological principle called stochastic resonance, where a certain amount of background white noise actually enhances the brain's ability to detect weak signals and focus on the primary task. It occupies the distractible, anxious part of the brain, allowing the executive function to lock in.
Let's talk about clothing, because we started with the scratchy wool sweater. I know so many people who cannot think clearly if they're wearing restrictive clothing. Suits, tight collars, rigid denim.
If you are sitting at a desk with a tight collar pressing against your neck or a rigid waistband cutting into your stomach, your nervous system is constantly receiving a subtle threat signal. It registers as physical compression. Removing that tight collar, switching to soft, loose fabrics, it literally quiets the nervous system.
So simple, but so effective.
The framework in our sources suggests a pick and mix strategy. You have to treat your environmental tweaks like a buffet. You test different sensory inputs, lighting, sound, texture, posture, temperature, and you observe what works for your unique biological traits. You mix and match until you find the exact recipe that gives you cognitive comfort.
What stands out to me here is how much society shames us for these exact biological needs.
Oh, massively.
If I tell my boss, hey, I need to write this incredibly important, highly analytical quarterly report, so I'm going to curl up on the sofa in a heavy blanket, wear my favorite oversized hoodie, and blast heavy metal music in my noise-canceling headphones, society says I am being unprofessional.
Right, because it doesn't look like work.
The traditional Stoic view is that serious work requires serious discomfort. A stiff chair, quiet room, formal business attire. But this framework is giving us permission to say, no, I am not being unprofessional. I am actively creating cognitive comfort so my specific brain can produce its highest quality work.
That is a profoundly liberating insight. We constantly confuse the appearance of productivity with the reality of cognitive function. Looking busy and uncomfortable is not the same as doing brilliant work. But, and here is the hard truth we have to face next, even if you perfectly curate your sensory environment, even if you are in your cozy hoodie with your smooth pen, listening to your ideal stochastic resonance, you are still, eventually, going to hit a wall.
Wait, why? If I've hacked my environment and lowered my allostatic load to 0, shouldn't my cognitive endurance be limitless?
Because operating your unique brain, dealing with your specific neurobiology, requires metabolic fuel, and that fuel is strictly, ruthlessly finite. This brings us to a conceptual metaphor that I think will resonate deeply with anyone who feels chronically exhausted. It's called the spoons concept.
Many of our listeners are probably familiar with spoon theory. It originated in the chronic illness community as a way to explain invisible fatigue, right? How does our source material adapt that specific framework for neurobiological personality traits?
It adapts it beautifully by applying it to cognitive and emotional energy. Imagine that every morning you wake up and you are handed a fistful of physical spoons. Let's say you get 20 spoons for the day.
Okay, 20 spoons.
Every single task you do, every decision you make, every sensory irritation you endure, and every time you mask your core personality to execute a learned behavior, it costs a spoon. It's a brilliant way to visualize ego depletion and metabolic cost.
Let's walk through a typical morning routine using this currency, counting the spoons. My alarm goes off at 6 a.m. It's a loud, jarring, traditional alarm clock.
Because of the sudden cortisol spike and the amygdala reaction, hand over 1 spoon immediately.
I drag myself to the kitchen. I really want a warm, comforting pastry, but society and diet culture say I should eat something optimal. So I force myself to eat a bowl of cold, flavorless bran flakes.
That act of willpower, that suppression of your genuine desire to conform to an external expectation, that is ego depletion. Hand over another spoon.
I get in my car for the commute. The traffic is awful. Someone aggressively cuts me off on the highway, and my fight-or-flight system kicks in. I grip the steering wheel, my heart races, and I have to actively suppress the urge to scream out the window.
The biological cost of processing that adrenaline spike, plus the executive function required to suppress your core reaction and practice a learned, calm behavior, that costs you 3 spoons.
3 spoons just for traffic.
Oh.
Okay, I finally get to the office. I am wearing business formal attire, a stiff collar, tight shoes. The fluorescent lights are buzzing above my cubicle.
Processing that sensory friction, forcing your brain to gate out the hum and the physical discomfort, costs you 3 spoons an hour. By the time you actually sit at your desk, boot up your computer, and open the document you're supposed to be working on, you look down at your hands and you only have 2 spoons left for the entire day.
Right.
You are essentially bankrupt before the workday has even technically begun.
Okay, I have to be honest. While the accounting is eye-opening, it sounds incredibly pessimistic. Are we just accepting defeat here? Are we basically saying, well, the world is hard, my brain is sensitive, the environment is hostile, and I don't have enough energy for life, so I might as well just give up?
I understand why it feels heavy at first glance, but the reality is the exact opposite. It's not defeatism, it's radical honesty. By visualizing our abstract, invisible energy as physical object spoons, we can finally start budgeting them.
Budgeting our energy.
Exactly. If you don't track your financial bank account, you go into debt. If you don't track your energetic spoons, you go into burnout. This leads us to the SOS strategy, save our spoons. Once you accept that your energy is finite, you stop trying to do everything perfectly and you start actively, ruthlessly choosing where to spend your spoons.
So it gives me clinical permission to drop things.
Precisely. If you know you have a massive analytical project due on Thursday that will require 10 spoons, you cannot spend 5 spoons on Wednesday night going to a loud, crowded networking event that you don't even want to attend. You have to save your spoons for the priority.
That makes sense.
But of course, life doesn't stop just because we're low on spoons. We still have massive to-do lists. We have chores, we have deadlines, we have emails. We can't just tell our kids we don't have enough spoons to feed them.
Right, which means we need practical, tactical strategies for the trenches. How do we actually handle the demands of modern life when our spoons are running low?
The framework provides a highly effective, task-savvy navigation system known as the 4Ds: do, defer, delegate, delete. Now, this sounds like standard corporate time management, but when viewed through the biological lens of saving spoons, it becomes an energy triage system.
Let's put this into a concrete, real-life scenario to see how it works as biological triage. It's a Wednesday evening. I walk into my kitchen, and there is a sink completely full of crusty, dried-on dishes. There is oatmeal cemented to a spoon. It is a sensory nightmare.
I can picture it.
Alongside that, I have a looming deadline for a presentation tomorrow morning, and my phone is buzzing with 20 unread emails. I look at the sink, I look at my laptop, I look at my phone, and I just freeze. Complete analysis paralysis. I do not have the spoons for all this.
Let's look at the neurology of that freeze. That is your executive function shutting down. Your prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed by the sheer number of micro-steps required to resolve the kitchen, the work, and the communication simultaneously.
Because it's never just one task, is it?
Exactly. Washing a single dish isn't one task. It's scraping, rinsing, soaping, scrubbing, drying, and putting away. Multiplied by 30 dishes, plus the emails, plus the presentation, it is an insurmountable mountain. So instead of trying to willpower your way through it or collapsing in guilt, you apply the 4Ds to offload the executive function.
Okay, walk me through it.
First, you look at the pressure to cook a healthy, elaborate dinner tonight. You realize cooking will cost 4 spoons, and you only have 3 left. So you apply the first D, delete. You delete the expectation of cooking entirely. You order takeout.
Guilt-free takeout because I am not being lazy. I am responsibly managing my metabolic energy.
Exactly. You are balancing the ledger. Next, the sink of dishes. You look at your partner or your roommate, and you apply the second D, delegate. You explain that you are out of spoons and you need them to handle the kitchen tonight so you can secure your job.
And the emails.
Now the emails. They are buzzing, they are annoying, but are they truly life or death urgent? No. You apply the third D, defer. You have a conscious, documented decision to ignore the emails until tomorrow at 1 p.m.
Which leaves the final D, do. I've cleared the mental clutter. I've triaged the crisis. Now I can actually do the presentation prep.
Yeah.
But I will play devil's advocate here. Even when you clear the clutter, starting work is incredibly hard when you are exhausted. Staring at a blank slide deck is still daunting.
Which is why the source material introduces a brilliant psychological tool called the multiple choice buffering task.
A buffering task, what's that?
When you finally sit down to do the work, don't force yourself into a single, massive, rigid task if your brain is actively resisting it. Give yourself a menu. You sit at your desk and you tell yourself, for the next hour, I am only requiring myself to do one of 3 acceptable options.
Like what?
Option A, write the complex outline for the presentation. Option B, research 3 specific data points for the middle slides. Option C, just format the title slides, pick the font, and adjust the colors. You give yourself 3 productive options, and you let your brain's current neurochemical mood pick the one that feels least painful.
I want to dig deeply into the neurology of this because this feels like the true aha moment of the entire framework. Normally, productivity advice tells us to eat the frog, do the hardest thing first.
Which can be terrible advice.
Yes, because it creates a toxic all-or-nothing mindset. We think if I don't write the entire complex outline right now, I have failed. The barrier to entry is so high and the pressure is so immense that we end up doing absolutely nothing. We paralyze ourselves and scroll social media for 2 hours instead.
That is exactly what happens. When the task is too big, the brain perceives it as a threat, and the amygdala pushes you towards the flight response, which in the modern world looks like scrolling on your phone to escape.
Wow, so scrolling is literal flight.
It is. But the flexibility of the buffering task bypasses the amygdala entirely. It lowers the barrier to entry so much that the brain no longer perceives the task as a threat. You look at the menu and you pick option C, formatting the slides. It's easy. It requires very low executive function. You pick a nice font, you line the text, it takes 5 minutes. But here is the critical part. What happens biologically when you finish that tiny, seemingly insignificant task?
You get a quick win. And finishing a task, no matter how small, triggers the brain's reward system. You get a targeted release of dopamine.
Yes. You stimulate the mesolimbic pathway. And remember our earlier discussion about dopamine. It's not just the pleasure chemical, it's the wanting and motivation molecule. By allowing yourself to dabble in the easiest option and secure a quick win, you literally manufacture a fresh hit of dopamine in your brain.
That's incredible.
That dopamine acts as metabolic fuel. It artificially creates a brand new spoon out of thin air. You manufacture energy by lowering the barrier to entry. That new dopamine hit gives you the momentum to move on to option B, the research. Completing the research gives you another dopamine hit, which gives you the fuel to finally tackle option A, the complex outline.
That is incredibly empowering. We aren't just blindly trying to work harder. We are decoding our biology. We are fixing our sensory environments to lower the allostatic load. We're budgeting our spoons with ruthless accounting, and we're using the 4Ds and dopamine manufacturing to tactically maneuver through our tasks. It feels like we have a complete user manual for the self.
It's a game changer.
But, well, here's the inevitable catch. We don't live in a vacuum.
Yeah.
I can perfectly curate my life. I can use the exact right pen and sit in the exact right lighting, but I still have to share this planet with 8 billion other operating systems.
Yes. Other people.
Right. I have to interact with bosses, partners, kids, and strangers whose brains are wired completely differently than mine. How do we survive the constant friction of human interaction?
That is the ultimate frontier of this exploration. Personal optimization is meaningless if it shatters your relationships. The framework calls the solution for this becoming Sherlock Holmes.
Becoming Sherlock Holmes. I like the sound of that.
It's the practice of radical empathy through quiet, non-judgmental observation. By paying attention to the behavioral markers of others, we can begin to guess their neurological wiring and then adjust our approach to meet them where they are.
So I am actively looking for clues in their behavior to figure out their 10-dimension profile. What kind of markers are we talking about in everyday life?
You observe the small, seemingly insignificant habits. What's their baseline speech volume and physical presence? Do they boom across the room, taking up physical space, readily jumping into debates?
That would be a strong signal for high dominance and high extroversion.
Exactly. Or do they speak softly, hesitate before answering, and prefer the corner of the room? That signals lower extroversion. Look at their relationship with punctuality. Do they arrive exactly on time, deeply agitated if a meeting starts 3 minutes late?
That's a marker for high order.
Yes. Look at their aesthetic choices. Do they dress in vibrant, highly textured clothing, constantly redecorating their office? That signals high openness to experience. Or do they wear the exact same functional, pragmatic outfit every single day?
Okay, let's say I start noticing these clues. How do I actually use them without being manipulative? Let's walk through a specific case study. I have a friend. I've observed over the years that they are highly organized. They love spreadsheets. Their house is immaculate. Everything has a place. So I deduce they are high order.
Good observation.
But I have also noticed they get very easily stressed by sudden, unexpected changes. If a dinner reservation is canceled at the last minute, it ruins their entire evening. So I deduce they are high volatility.
That is a perfect logical deduction. You've identified a high-order, high-volatility operating system. Now, let's say it's your friend's birthday. If you don't understand their personality and you only view the world through your own lens, you might think, I love surprises. Spontaneity is the best.
Oh, I see where this is going.
So you show up at their house unannounced at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, honking the horn, yelling, pack a bag right now, we are going on a spontaneous weekend road trip to the mountains.
Oh, no. For a high-order, high-volatility person, that is not a gift. That is a biological threat. Their amygdala is going to scream. Their
Mhm.
absolute need for predictable boxes is completely violated. They're going to have a physiological stress response, a cortisol dump to my fun surprise, and then I'm going to get offended that they aren't happy and the friendship suffers.
Precisely. You cause them pain by ignoring their wiring. But because you have played Sherlock Holmes, you can practice radical empathy. Instead of projecting your own desires onto them, you adjust your approach. You give them a detailed itinerary 3 weeks in advance.
You cater to their boxes.
Yes, you tell them, we are going to the mountains for your birthday. Here is the schedule, here is the weather forecast so you know what to pack, and here is exactly what time I am picking you up. You aren't doing this to be cold or overly formal. You are doing this to save their spoons. You are giving their prefrontal cortex the boxes it needs so their amygdala doesn't fire.
Wow, that fundamentally changes how I view empathy. Empathy isn't just about feeling sorry for someone or giving them a hug when they are sad. Radical empathy is about actively translating the world into their language. It's recognizing that their brain requires a different sensory and structural input than yours, and generously choosing to provide it.
That is the highest, most evolved form of human connection. It bridges the gap between isolated minds. When we apply this framework at scale, it actually has the power to dramatically reduce societal polarization.
How so?
Think about it. We stop looking at people who behave differently and quickly labeling them with moral judgments. We stop saying they are difficult, stubborn, lazy, or too sensitive. We start seeing them as unique biological individuals who are simply trying to manage their specific sensory and structural needs in a world that might not be built for them. It replaces judgment with deep scientific curiosity.
This has been such a profound and complex journey today. I want to look back at where we started. We began this session picturing you sitting at a desk, scratching your neck in a wool sweater, listening to the agonizing hum of a fluorescent light, looking at a thriving colleague and feeling deeply, inherently broken.
A feeling we know all too well.
And we end here with this incredibly empowering, scientifically grounded realization. Human potential is not about conforming to a universally perfect standard of productivity. That standard is a myth.
A total myth.
True potential is about deeply decoding your own biological blueprint. It is about fiercely protecting your finite energy through cognitive comfort and tactical budgeting. And perhaps most beautifully, it is about extending that exact same grace, that radical empathy, to the incredibly diverse mosaic of minds that share the world with you.
It is a profound shift from guilt to responsibility and from judgment to curiosity. And to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own as you digest all of this, if we accept that your core personality, your baseline neurological reactions were largely set in stone by the time you were 5 years old, what tiny, seemingly insignificant childhood habit of yours, the specific way you played with toys, the textures you avoided, the quiet corner you sought out when the house was loud, is actually a hidden clue, a biological map to unlocking your ultimate peace and productivity today.
I love that. A perfect mystery for you to chew on as you go about your week. Observe your impulses, audit your environment, and pay attention to what your younger self already knew. Thank you so much for joining us on this audio exploration into the hidden architecture of the mind. Budget your spoons wisely, find your cognitive comfort, and we will catch you next time.